We will be happy if you can take your seat. So we continue with the second segment of our afternoon, which takes us to the high point of the launch of the World Investment Report 2015 by UNCTAD. May I, therefore, on behalf of the ACP Secretariat, express again a warm welcome to those who have joined us for this segment of our meeting. How much we appreciate the time given for those who have attended, the trade officials and our ministerial that will continue tomorrow at 9 o'clock. The ACP is particularly proud and happy that Secretary General Dr. Kitui, Secretary General of UNCTAD, has graced us and given us this great privilege that he would come home to the ACP and launch the World Investment Report 2015. Without more ado, I need only to say that we would particularly welcome comments, deliberations now from our ministers, but also further reflection, because the ACP intends to strengthen its partnership with UNCTAD and to see ways in which we can participate both in terms of the forthcoming financing for development in Addis Ababa, build on that as we look towards the Sustainable Development Goals and the UN General Assembly in September, and then to carry it to the COP21 climate change. For us, investment has to be the way in which we look at mobilizing the resources, primarily for the structural transformation of our economies. And as Dr. Kitui has indicated in his earlier remarks, this is fundamental for the transformation that we are expecting from our economies if we are to eradicate poverty and effectively participate on equitable terms in a global economy. Against those few remarks, I have the honor and privilege of inviting Secretary General of the UNCTAD, Dr. Kitui, to address us and launch the 2015 report. Dr. Kitui.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gomez. Once again, allow me to express our appreciation for hosting us and according us an opportunity before this distinguished audience to carry out an exercise we do once every year. Like you must know, the UNCTAD World Investment Report is the only world investment report in the world. Many times people know about the World Investment Report, but they think it's from the World Bank. And others like it's from an institution, the World. So there's a lot of reference to the World Investment Report without appreciating that it's actually a product of UNCTAD. And I thought that it's a privilege to be able, on the occasion of my meeting with the ACP trade ministers, use this occasion. We were to launch it today, this evening, globally anyway. And I thought that it would be best that on the occasion I do the launch here. This exercise is simultaneously taking place around the world. We have partner institutions in different countries, mostly members of our virtual university, our virtual institute, our internet university community, and institutions which are partnering us on economic training programs, and other institutions around the world which are simultaneously launching this. I'll give you indulgence that because of the specificity of some of the specific things that are to be said in the report, while I would very much appreciate to emulate my eloquent producer, the President, extemporaneously, I may have to read a text on this report to present the specific details here. The core of the World Investment Report, as always is the case for the past 20 years, reflects our work on foreign direct investment flows and policies around the world. This year's special topic is around reforming international investment governance. Over the past 2 years, I made a decision that all our flagship reports will be relating to the post-2015 agenda and FFD. So last year, World Investment Report was investing in sustainable development sectors. And this year, it's on reform and governance of investment. As part of our family of contributing to the ideas on how to move sustainable development goals from the what to the how. Exceptionally, in this 25th edition of the World Investment Report, the theme part of the report contains 2 chapters. One presenting an action menu for reform of the international investment regime, and the other arguing for greater coherence between international tax and investment policies. I want to briefly summarize how I want to make this presentation. First, I'll present the main foreign direct investment FDI trends at the global and regional levels. Then I'll look at trends in national and international investment policy making, and then discuss the 2 chapters constituting the theme part of the report. Global and regional FDI trends. Global FDI inflows in 2014 declined. They fell by 16% to $1.2 trillion, mostly because of the fragility of the global economy, policy uncertainty for investors, and elevated geopolitical risks. Inward flows to developing countries reached the highest level ever at 681 billion, representing a 2% rise from the previous year. Developing economies now account for 55% of global FDI inflows. Among the top 10 FDI recipients in the world, 5 are now developing countries. The low-level flows to developed countries persisted in 2014. Despite a revival in cross-border mergers and acquisitions, overall FDI flows to the group of economies declined by 28% to 499 billion. Developing Asia, rising at 9%, saw FDI inflows grow to historically high levels. They reached nearly $500 billion in 2014, further consolidating the region's position as the largest recipient of FDI in the world. FDI flows to Africa remained flat at 54 billion. An interesting development is taking place at the sectoral level, however. Although the services share in Africa FDI is still lower than the developing countries' average, services now account for about 50% of the total FDI stock in the region, more than twice the share of manufacturing. FDI stock in the primary sector is about 30% of the total. FDI flows to Latin America and the Caribbean decreased to $159 billion, down 14% after 4 years of consecutive increases. This was mainly due to a decline in cross-border mergers and acquisitions in Central America and the Caribbean, and lower commodity prices, which dampened FDI to South America. FDI in transition economies decreased by 52% to 42 billion in 2014. Regional conflict coupled with falling oil prices and international sanctions have damaged economic growth prospects and shrunk investor interest in this region. Flows to structurally weak, vulnerable and small economies are varied. This is significant in light of the upcoming Financing for Development Conference in Addis Ababa, where the role of FDI as an important source of external finance for development will be at the core of the discussions. FDI to the least developed countries, LDCs, increased by 4%. Landlocked developing countries, LLDCs, experienced a decline of 3%, mostly for those in Asia and Latin America. By contrast, FDI inflows to small island developing states, the SEEDs, increased by a whole 22% due to a rise in cross-border mergers and acquisitions and sales. FDI remains an important component of external development finance to these economies. Over the last decade, FDI stock tripled in LDCs and seeds and quadrupled in LLDCs. With a concerted effort by the international investment development community, it will be possible to have FDI stock in structurally weak economies quadruple again by 2030. More important, further efforts are needed to harness financing for economic diversification to foster greater resilience and sustainability in these countries. Now, if I may look specifically at ACP group of countries, FDI inflows remained stable during the past 4 years at around 50 billion. In 2014, combined inflows in the 79 countries reached 52 billion US dollars, representing a 5% increase over the previous year. Inflows to the 48 African ACP countries amounted to 44 billion, increasing by 4%. Now, the largest recipients among these were South Africa, DRC Congo, Mozambique, Nigeria, and Ghana. Inflows to the 16 Caribbean economies rose by 17% to just over $8 billion, thanks to growth in the largest recipients. These are Trinidad and Tobago and the Dominican Republic. The 15 countries from the Pacific saw inflows decline by 16% to $400 million. Although Papua New Guinea and Timor-Leste have hosted a number of big projects in the extractives industry, they continue to register modest FDI flows because of non-FDI arrangements of investment. The European Union is a major source of FDI to the ACP group. Its FDI stock in the 79 countries as a whole accounts for 1/3 of the total FDI stocks in those countries. Looking at the prospects for the future, we at UNCTAD believe that an FDI recovery is in sight. We project global FDI inflows to grow to $1.4 trillion in 2015. Expectations are high for a further rise to $1.7 trillion by 2017. Continuing strong profitability and cash holdings by multinational enterprises signal ample capacity to invest. Also, UNCTAD's business survey of over 1,000 top executives of large MNEs signals a rise of FDI flows in the coming year. Of course, a number of economic, political risks may disrupt this recovery scenario. If I may now turn to national and international investment policy issues. At the national level, countries' investment policy measures continue to be geared predominantly towards investment liberalization and promotion and facilitation. In 2014, more than 80% of investment policy measures aimed to improve entry conditions and reduce restrictions. A number of countries introduced or amended their investment laws or guidelines to grant new investment incentives or to facilitate investment procedures. Several countries relaxed restrictions on foreign ownership limitations or opened up new business activities to foreign investments, example in infrastructure and services. Looking at trends in international investment policies, 31 new international investment agreements were concluded in 2014. New treaties tend to include provisions related to sustainable development. Most of the agreements reviewed include at least one provision geared towards safeguarding the right to regulate for the public interest, including sustainable development objectives as contained in our investment policy framework. With the new treaties, the IIA universe grew to 3,271 investment agreements or treaties in the world. ACP countries account for around a quarter of all these in the IIA universe, with 744 bilateral investment treaties and various other international investment agreements. This includes the Cotonou Agreement, which has a number of investment-related provisions. ACP countries also faced a number of disputes brought by investors brought on the basis of investment agreements. By the end of 2014, ACP countries were defendants in 35 non-investor state dispute settlement cases. A proper handling of investment dispute settlement, therefore, becomes a priority for this group of countries. While the IIA universe continues to expand, new approaches to investment policy making are being considered. At least 50 countries and regions were engaged in reviewing and revising their investment agreement models. Again, this includes a number of SCP countries. Which brings me to reforming of the international investment agreement regime. There is a pressing need for a systematic reform of the global investment agreement regime. World Investment Report 15, which we are launching now, offers an action menu for such reform. We consider that a reform should address 5 main challenges. 1. Safeguard the right to regulate in the public interest. 2. Reforming investment dispute settlement. 3. Promoting and facilitating investment. 4. Ensuring responsible investment. And 5. Enhancing the systematic consistency of the international investment agreement regime to overcome the gaps, overlaps, and inconsistencies of the current system. UNCTAD presents policy options for meeting these challenges, mostly addressing the standard elements found in an investment agreement. In terms of process, international investment agreement reform actions need to be undertaken at the national, bilateral, regional, and multilateral levels. Reform steps at the national level, for example, new model investment agreements, or bilateral level, for example, renegotiation of old investment agreements, can play an important role in countries' reform strategies. At the same time, national and bilateral level reform actions risk perpetuating, if not exacerbating, the fragmentation and incoherence of the global investment agreement regime. Reform initiatives at the multilateral or regional level, although more challenging, offer a means to consolidate IIA reform process. Regional reform processes could span from a collective review of the underlying regional and bilateral treaty networks to its consolidation into one body of reform agreements. At the multilateral level, a global review and identification of the system risks and emerging issues could lead to consensus building on key international investment agreement reform issues that ultimately could feed into more consolidated approaches, including for future international investment rulemaking. By presenting reform approaches, guidelines, tools, solutions, and a roadmap for the reform process, this year's World Investment Report offers an action menu for international investment reform for the first time in history. It pulls together a variety of contributions that have been put forward in recent years by UNCTAD and by many others on aspects of the international investment agreement reform. It invites countries to use this action menu and define their own roadmaps on IIA reform. Countries can pick and choose the respective reform actions and options to formulate their own reform packages in line with their individual reform objectives. All of this should be guided by the goals of harnessing IIS for sustainable and inclusive growth and determining the most effective means to safeguard the right to regulate while providing protection and facilitation for investment. The reform should focus on critical areas, including actions at all levels, take a systematic and sequential approach to ensure inclusiveness and transparency, and make use of multilateral support structures, such as one provided by our organization, UNCTAD. We consider that IIA reform is particularly important to the SCP countries. Their overlapping treaty networks, their growing exposure to investor-state dispute settlement, and the broader sustainable development challenges they face make it even more important for them to design IIS that effectively harness international investment relations to the pursuit of sustainable development. ACP countries are indeed actively formulating their IIA networks. This includes treaties with the European Union and EU member states. Doing so in an effective manner requires a number of significant steps. For example, the ACP countries may need to do the following. 1. Keep abreast of the rapid evolution of the global IIA regime, including the higher standards included in more recent agreements. 2. Follow the evolution of international investment law as it emanates from the awards tribunals issued in the ISDS cases. And number 4, monitor current reform activities, including countries' changes to their model investment agreements. A thorough understanding of these issues is essential for successfully formulating IIS strategies that ensure coherence between IIS and national development strategies, and that effectively harness foreign investment for sustainable development. UNCTAD's technical assistance can help in this regard. IIA-related assistance and for investment policy reviews, both of which are based on our investment policy framework for sustainable development. This can offer concrete support for meeting the above-mentioned challenges. To this, we add UNCTAD's function as a multilateral platform where countries can share their experiences with investment agreements and the impact that they have. If I may now turn briefly to the issue of international tax and investment policy coherence. Intense debate and concrete policy work is ongoing in the international community on the fiscal contribution of multinational enterprises. The focus is predominantly on tax avoidance, notably in the BEPS project of OECD. This issue has taken a prominent place in the debate on domestic resource mobilization. At the same time, sustained investment is needed for global economic growth and development, especially in light of the financing needs for the SDGs, the topic of last year's World Investment Report. Now, the policy imperative is to take action against tax avoidance to support domestic resource mobilization and continue to facilitate productive investment for sustainable development. MNEs make a significant contribution to developing country government budgets. UNCTAD estimates the fiscal contribution of foreign affiliates in developing countries at approximately $730 billion per annum. This represents on average some 10% of the total government revenues. At the same time, tax avoidance by multinational enterprises is a hot topic. As you heard earlier on in the statement presented by the Secretary General. An investment perspective on tax avoidance puts the spotlight on the role of the combination of offshoring, hubs, and the special purpose entities. Some 30% of cross-border corporate investment stocks have been routed through offshore hubs before reaching the destination as productive assets. Now, tax avoidance practiced by multinationals are a global issue relevant to all countries. The exposure to investments from offshore hubs is broadly similar for developing and developed countries. However, profits shifting out of developing countries can have a significant negative impact on their prospects for sustainable development. Developing countries are often less equipped to deal with highly complex tax avoidance practices because of resource constraints and lack of technical expertise. Tax avoidance practices are responsible for a significant leakage of development finance resources, an estimated $100 billion of annual revenue losses for developing countries related to inward investment stocks directly linked to offshoring. Action must be taken to tackle this issue, but carefully considering the effects on international investment, because offshore investment hubs also play a systematic role that is very important in international investment flows. They are part of the global FDI financing infrastructure. Today, ongoing anti-avoidance discussions in the international community pay limited attention to investment policy. Our report this year proposes a set of policy principles for coherent international tax and investment policies. Synergetic international tax and investment policies should aim, 1, to remove aggressive tax planning opportunities as investment promotion levers. 2, to consider the potential impact on investment of anti-avoidance measures. 3, take a partnership approach to tackling tax avoidance in recognition of shared responsibilities between host, home, and conduit countries. 4, manage the interaction between international investment and tax agreements. 5, enhance the capabilities of developing countries to address tax avoidance issues. And finally, strengthen the role of both investment and fiscal revenues in sustainable development. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, the World Investment Report 2014 showed the massive worldwide financing needs for sustainable development and the important role that FDI can play in bridging the investment gap, which UNCTAD projected at $2.4 trillion US, especially in developing countries. In this light, strengthening the global investment policy environment, including both the IIA and the international tax regimes, must be given the rightful priority. The international investment and development community should and can eventually build a common framework for global investment cooperation for the benefit of all. Thank you very much for your kind attention. May I now officially declare World Investment Report 2015 as launched and now a public document.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. The floor is open, and we have with us Mr. James Zan, the Director, who would be able to make some remarks and also respond to questions and elaborate on issues. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. It's an honor to be here with our Secretary General, Dr. Kitui. I think he has already had a very comprehensive presentation, so I don't have much to say. I'm just here to take your questions together with our Secretary General.
So, ministers, floor is open. Comments, questions, elaboration on any of the issues. And we have some time, certainly, before our reception downstairs, which will also allow for informal continuation of the discussions. Of course, it has been so thorough, comprehensive, but much to digest and to think through. But I believe we can come back a little bit, because so many of the middle-income countries are facing what is referred to as domestic resource mobilization as a priority. Sorry, but before I continue, please, Mauritius would like to take the floor. Mauritius, you have the floor.
Thank you, Secretary General. Thank you very much, Dr. Kitui. At page 93 of the report, when you speak of small island developing states, you do actually state that at the SIDS conference, at the third SIDS conference in Samoa in 2014, it was highlighted that there was a need for further efforts to harness financing for economic diversification to foster greater resilience. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, this now infamous blacklist of the European Union has 15 island states among the 30. So that appears to be a paradox, because those islands do need the inflows. They are known to be vulnerable, and on the other hand, they are blacklisted in a manner which in fact is criticized even by the OECD. What will be your comments on that paradox?
Well, I'm glad that I speak for an organization other than EC, than the European Union on this one. Our sense is we can't run away from the discussion about growing push for greater transparency in international financial services, which is a confluence of very many different streams. One is anti-laundering and anti-trafficking as a way of smoking out the illicit gains from criminal activity. But another has been originally driven by the US, which was fighting about Americans storing away value beyond the reach of the tax authority, and therefore obliging international cooperation for a very domestic agenda. EU has only come on board now because it was mostly European countries on a defensive, when they talk about Monaco, Luxembourg, or Switzerland. But now the phenomenon that you are seeing, particularly when it's concerning developing countries, our position, which I presented earlier on in our discussion, is that there has to be inclusive engagement. We have discussed about what level of transparency is required in the management of financial services in the financial hubs. Because you can't run away from the fact that these countries are not only depending on the financial services as a contribution to the national economy, but they are also offering a legitimate service in the management, in streamlining the investment flows between source and host countries. So we cannot, as it were, destroy a legitimate enterprise and livelihoods on the basis of a component which is being written large as if it's the only phenomenon happening in the financial services hub. This is the position we're taking. We cannot stop the inquisition that goes on, but we're calling for inclusive dialogue on balance, national interest, legitimate transactions, and the fight against laundering and the tax evasion.
Further? Yes, Barbados, you have the floor.
I want to pick up the speaker on what he just said. If you look at some of these countries that the EU has listed, it is precisely a number of these countries who are conforming to the OECD tax thing. But yet the EU, who are members of the same OECD, have a different thing. So how do you reconcile it? I see where you're coming from, but it is a dichotomy. It seems to be contradictory. For 20 years or more, countries in the Caribbean have been trying to conform and have been making great strides. But a couple of days ago, we find the EU put out their own thing. How do you reconcile those things? That is the problem.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the passion you bring to this matter. For 51 years...
And death for us. It's life and death for Barbados and a number of other countries in Caribbean who have no natural resources
thank you,
or
Ambassador.
anything.
I think Secretary General wants to respond.
For 51 years, UNCTAD has striven to position itself as an institution in the UN family that is friendly to developing countries. And we find the best way to use our friendliness is to mobilize our technical expertise, put them at your disposal, and help to look at what are the challenges in the global setting. I hope that in our interactions this afternoon, we have prepared you to ask that question when you have the joint meeting on Friday.
Senegal, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le...
Thank you, President. And thank you, Mr. Secretary General. First of all, I want to congratulate you on really an excellent presentation. And I was very interested in the points that you made, the guidelines that you came up with. Now, on the basis of a fairly superficial reading, I agree with you that investment, of course, is part of the funding of an economy, along with remittances from the diaspora. And so investment is extremely important for development. The question is how this investment is going to develop and change over time compared to the other sources of funding. Secondly, more and more emphasis is being placed on the massive volume of investment from emerging countries. Could we have an evaluation of that particular trend, which apparently is a very strong trend, i.e. investment from the emerging countries? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for a very pertinent question. I'll give part of this to James to come in, but just 2-3 things I want to mention. First of all, if you look at, for example, the image picture we gave of Africa, that investment flows have remained almost the same with a marginal increase of 4%. But the reality is traditional source investment declined very dramatically. And that gap has been filled by the dramatic increase of investment flows from emerging economies. So if you look at flows from Asia, they were slightly more than the decline in flows from Europe and America. So that's a phenomenon, but the statistic is in the report. Number two, each country must define, on the basis of self-interest, what are its priority areas? What are its priority sectors? What nature of investment is interesting for it to improve its productive capacity, to sustain improvements of its entrepreneurial competences, for it to undergo structural transformation. So it is my organization argues for the resurgence of the developmental state, a state which sets priorities, a state which coalesces policies for different sectors and the ministries of the government in a way that responds to the priorities that the country has set itself. So if there is such a developmental state, it should be in a position to define what kind of investment it can take in. But there is something that is happening, and we have to warn, which is we are becoming reflective. We are getting easy with bond markets, and the challenges that we are facing can hurt us. Over the past year, there has been a very dramatic increase of countries going on to the private financial service markets and floating euro bonds and dollar bonds. It is not terribly bad yet. I mean, because the debt level across the ACP countries are about 23-25%. No, developing Africa is 23%. It's much higher in SEEDs and in the Caribbean. But what's happening is that the countries which are entering these Eurobond markets have to see that we are in a phase of declining commodity yields. We're in a phase of our strengthening dollar. We're in a phase when in a few months we'll see substantial rises in interest rates. All these are going to put pressure on the private markets. And unlike the concessionary markets, there is no sympathy, there's no political intervention with those vultures. So I think we have to be careful also about how much we exercise our discretion in going to the private financial markets. But basically the main thing is every country should tailor the package of investment attractions on the basis of its priorities for development. I don't know if you want to add something, James.
Thank you. I think our Secretary General has already made the important points. I just wish to mention in response to your question the additional source of financing and investment. I think our Secretary General has already pointed out, and now we see the investment going to developing countries are mainly from other developing countries or advanced developing countries, in particular in Africa. We see that the investment from Asia, from Gulf region to those countries, and to some of the Caribbean countries. Now, other alternative source or the new source of financing includes sovereign wealth funds, pension funds. They are now increasingly interested in longer-term investment in addition to the short-term, investing in infrastructure, for example. So that is one source that we may think of how to attract. The second is related to impact investment or social impact investment. This is a new type of investment. They combine the profit making with a social purpose and environmental protection purposes. So this is a new source of development financing that's worth paying attention to and making efforts to attract such an investment. So these are the sources I think that's very useful. The other thing is that we see there's a new wave of industrial restructuring driven by the global value chain, driven by the cost factors, the rising cost in countries like China in production. Not only China, now it's also in other countries, even Vietnam, that we saw used to attract a lot of investment, including investment flew out of China, that simple manufacturing or labor-intensive industries. Now they are moving out of China and perhaps in the near future start in a bigger way of moving out of Vietnam. Then where does this type of investment going moving further? We see one is the destination of Africa, the other is South Asia. And Southeast Asia, like Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, South Asia, like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and we see some of the African countries in Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia in particular. So these are the trends we see, this industrial restructuring. And that goes well with Africans' development of diversification, so to speak. Thank you.
Yes, Chad.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I, for my part, on behalf of the Republic of Chad, would like to congratulate the Secretary General of UNCTAD, Dr. Kituyi, for his excellent presentation. And I'd also like to thank all the panelists who spoke before him. On the issue of investment, this is in the wake of Senegal's question on the appropriate answers which were given, to which, over the last decade, there has been massive investment on the part of emerging economies, but very often uncontrolled. What I mean here refers to the impact of it. You spoke about a number of reforms. We may perhaps go into detail on governance, but it's a two-pronged question I have. How can UNCTAD give technical assistance in analyzing the investments to the recipient countries? Very often, as you know, there are political choices made relating to those investment analyses. So what are the best practices that you can suggest to a number of developing countries in order for there to be some protection in this area? And at the same time, the emerging countries, are there any restrictions? Can UNCTAD impose certain restrictions on them so that the investment can be better channeled and better controlled, and we would have some clear thinking on this issue? Thank you very much.
Very much. First of all, we are a service organization. We are not a regulatory organization. We can suggest to you what is, in our view, of your best interest, but we cannot oblige you to do anything. So we respect the right of countries to democratically make mistakes. What we do is that, like what we're just doing on investments, that we say, you know, this is the list of the common mistakes we see. This is a list of suggested solutions, not mistakes. We have been involved in initiatives that try to set standards on contracting. For example, we have been generating and promoting models of gas and oil extractives contracting. We have contributed to, for Africa, the mineral observatory, the minimum requirements on transparency in the regulation and in the pricing negotiations for investment. We are always available to any country that seeks our assistance in doing due diligence on a contract that they are about to enter. Earlier on today, I was discussing with one person who was one official here, who was saying the regional community has been asked by the US to enter into an investment agreement with them. Is there any way we can help? Yes, we are ready when you are asked. we will look at what the Americans are offering and assist to interpret what it implies and suggest how to strengthen, how to avoid loopholes and the mishaps of the past. This is the kind of service we can offer. But you see that at the end of the day, the decision of where you want to go belongs to you. When I was a politician, I used to say, those who have no destination cannot get lost. You must have a place you're trying to go. And if you have a destination, we can help to advise about the bumpy road, about the shortcut. But if you're just walking about, as Americans say, if you are not going anywhere in particular, any route will take you there. Thank you.
Any further questions from the floor? I wonder if Secretary General will come back a bit to the middle-income countries, and so much is being advocated about domestic resource mobilization. But precisely what was mentioned by Barbados and Mauritius, it is some of the middle-income countries that have moved to the financial services, and now you're so quickly being blacklisted, it really confines the room you have to maneuver. How then do you see us going both to Addis Ababa, and what should we be advocating about the relief that is necessary of their increasing indebtedness to the middle-income countries, and at the same time squeezing them in the option they're trying to take? Where do we find the middle road in that, or where do we find some room to maneuver on behalf of middle-income countries? Because in other words, we're being graduated into increasing indebtedness and being penalized by the avenues we take. So that contradiction is really putting many of our middle-income countries and many of our members of the ACP in difficult situations. So how do we maneuver?
Thank you very much. It's a very tight situation. I cannot pretend to justify it. What I can say is that with internal consultation and the basis of this engagement, that there is an inclusive discussion about how do we improve oversight without destroying an important engine of social inclusion and prosperity for so many countries. That should be part of your agenda for Friday. So I think it's the party to talk to is your partners on Friday. But having said that also, we have to face a reality on our way to Addis. One, everybody has said this, Addis is not a pledging conference. So nobody's going to pledge any new resources in Addis. But that doesn't take away from certain responsibilities. One, there should be a collective voice that the global commitment of 0.7% of GNI must be reaffirmed. That there should not be a retreat on that. Because for many vulnerable smaller economies, while ODA may not be the powerful thing it is for everybody, it remains a major source. Particularly if the potential for them to leverage it for FDI. Secondly, there is creative accounting, where countries now shift envelopes. You say we have an SDG envelope, as what used to be our ODA envelope. But in the SDG envelope, you put in domestic action on environment. You take in a greening of your production, and then you append to it traditional ODA. So you can nominally declare that the package you have for SDG has increased, when actually a lot of it is domesticated. And you're just mixing it in an innovative way to appear to be moving forwards, when in net terms on development solidarity, you're moving backwards. I think these are issues that you as ministers for the government's concern should seek to take position on in Addis and beyond. Let the ambitions of September be matched by commitments of July. Thank you.
Benin, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Secretary General, through this report, the institution which you have been heading with skill and expertise shows how well it is servicing and serving the developing countries. It feeds into the thinking process in our countries, so we are grateful to you for that. Trade and services in Africa, foreign direct investment, in fact, accounts for 48%. It's true, we have seen that port services, telecommunications, health, and finance are developing in our countries because they reflect the need of many Africans to have a mobile phone, for example. Maybe you can dwell a bit on trade in services, give us some more detail on this. Given such a development, is there a transfer of know-how? One of the results of trade in services is to leave something that you can work on and develop yourself with. So maybe you can give some more detail on this trade in services so that we can benefit from your expertise. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I share your view that trade in services is an extremely important area of investing for the growth of ACP countries. In the specific case of African countries, today 50% of GDP of African countries is in services. But this is before there has been concerted effort by governments. I don't want to give you a comprehensive answer to your question because the Africa Development Report 2015, which I will launch at the Economic Commission, the ECOSOC in New York on the 9th of July, is about the role of services in Africa's development. We have a comprehensive statement on services and why they should be at the center forward of national policy, trade in services for Africa. That's the Africa Report 2015. So simultaneously, I'll be launching it in New York, and my director for Africa will be launching it in Addis Ababa. Thank you.
Côte d'Ivoire. Côte d'Ivoire.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, let me congratulate you on the skillful way you've been handling our deliberations. And I'd like to congratulate Secretary General of UNCTAD for his brilliant presentation of this report. In your statement, you eloquently outlined rights and obligations in investment policies in the developing countries and how they are inadequate. So how can we balance these rights and these obligations? You also referred to a number of countries from the ACP group, particularly African ones, who recently got resources from international financial markets. You seem to have criticized this way of getting funding in order to fund our development. Maybe, well, you did talk about the low impact this may have on our countries and our economies. We have to take a fresh look at how those resources are received. Cote d'Ivoire recently got resources from the international financial markets, but the amounts involved are relatively low given the investment needs of the country. These are sources of financing which tie in with other sources of financing from abroad, including foreign direct investment. Over the last 3 years, we have seen a significant increase in FDI in Côte d'Ivoire. I should say that going into international financial markets could serve as a linchpin to activate foreign direct investment? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I have not said don't go into the financial markets. I even said for Africa, your rates still remain relatively low and manageable, but that there should be a flag, a warning. And I said, take caution from others who have been there before. What are my main suggestions? My main suggestions are that you should be interested parties in the establishment of a debt workout mechanism that is not arbitrary, that is not opaque, but represents an opportunity that taxpayers' interests are safeguarded in the event of a dispute about repayment when some phenomenon happens. I very much like and appreciate what has been happening in your country in the recent past. Many of us know the potential of Cote d'Ivoire as a major driver and regionally, and when we see the resources being put into value addition in cocoa for the first time, we salute those efforts. We're just saying, hurry but with caution. And one of the cautions is not avoiding, but joining forces with the others who in the UN system are arguing for a debt workout mechanism that represents a fair chance to deal with countries. If you look at what happened in Argentina, you see what we're trying to avoid happening in other countries. On the question of right investment, if I remember well, what are we saying as caution? That if we are talking about the role of investment in sustainable development goals, there must be a balance between rights and obligations. You can't give all the rights to the investor and all the obligations to the state and the taxpayer. So we need a dispute resolution mechanism that is transparent and fair, that can reduce the cost to the taxpayer from the trend that we have seen happening in the ISDS system that exists today. And secondly, we are saying investment protection should not take away from the need for investment promotion. Protection is just a component. That should be also about, we are encouraging you to come in, we'll offer you this protection, but you undertake that this multiplier effect will be there. So for example, a staggered contracting of local suppliers as part of building local capacity. You know, the negotiations you did in the 80s and early 90s with your backs against the wall cannot be replicated in the 21st century. Learning from the mistakes when you eroded social security because of structural adjustment. We say today, you can start saying, you don't have to do what South Africa has done, and South Africa has been a leader in this, by declaring all bilateral investment treaties, that stock we are discarding. That's a nice result which they are going towards, but that not all have to go that route. We can have a staggered step-by-step reform process with an action menu that helps sustain the process of improvement, but also without offending the investor. That's the message we're trying to make.
Thanks very much to Secretary General. Further questions? We will have some time, of course. The reception is waiting for us downstairs. But I think it's been extremely enlightening and very informative, and we want to serve notice that the UNCTAD Secretary General has offered to provide technical assistance, and one of the areas we believe that could be looked at are what kind of essential elements should be included as the ACP as a whole begins to look at what can be a common investment regime. Precisely the elements, and you hinted already about staggering the capacity building when we enter into investment. What level of beneficiation? Botswana, we have an example in how they deal with the diamond industry, and increasingly we want to see how that could be. So we would think that UNCTAD would play a very significant part in providing some technical assistance for us as we look to seeing how we go down to 2020 and beyond in the work. And I do hope so. Ministers and Excellencies, officials, we want to bring this part of the formal exchange to a close. And on your behalf, most certainly, convey our great thanks to Secretary General UNCTAD and his team, and wish them all success in their work, and give them due notice and warning that we'd like them to be with us again on some other occasion and to follow up. But on your behalf, we say thanks, and please join us for the reception downstairs. I thank you.